Hello and welcome to my webinar. I'm very pleased to be able to be here today, and I'm happy to see we have a few hundred participants from all over the world. Our topic for the next half hour or so will be about cybersecurity and cyber knowledge in general, online education in relation to cyber learning. We'll touch upon the coronavirus and its impact on the cyber industry, discuss the different options with regards to cyber learning, and finish off with some homework I hope you will enjoy. A little bit of an introduction. My name is Bart and I'm responsible for the run part of our IT organization at NN Life Insurance Japan, which is part of NN Group, a global insurer headquartered in the Netherlands and Europe. In my past, I've been working in various security, audit, and risk management roles where I focus on making our work a little bit more secure. As a final note before we begin, my standard disclaimer that all views and opinions presented here are my own only and may not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of my employer and its affiliates. So now you are here listening to this webinar. Whatever the trigger is that brought you here today, you made a first step, which is to have enough curiosity to search for something new consciously or unconsciously. And so I try to depict some of the key elements I'll refer to throughout my presentation, which I personally call a circuit of knowledge. Regardless of whether you follow an online webinar, study at a university, or go for a training, you'll hopefully recognize these elements in some sort of order. Now, let me walk you through this circle. So once we get curious about a specific field or topic, we usually start learning, studying, and then hopefully practicing the knowledge we have acquired. This helps us to ultimately build or change our mindset about a specific area. It drives our passion and boosts our creativity as we learn and understand more. It is a simple recipe that opens our way to become successful. Take one or two of the elements and what we learn becomes unsustainable, as we don't have the drive to explore and appreciate what we learned, or our knowledge fades away as we don't put it enough into practice. Without doubt, the current pandemic has impacted all of us to a different degree. I personally also have my own story as I got stuck in Europe for 4 months during a private trip, and I couldn't go back to Japan due to the newly imposed travel restrictions. When you work at night, 9,000 kilometers from your company, colleagues, and employees, have all your plans turned upside down, and are faced with various personal circumstances, it really triggers you to think about how to make the best of what you have, how to appreciate life and the technological developments we all benefit from. Whatever your personal or professional story is, the fact is that the pandemic triggered a whole chain of changes in technology, our behavior, lifestyle, just to name a few. While the nature of pandemic is relatively slow, so after the first cases popped up, we knew we need to get prepared. It still required lots of creativity to cope with the unknown. For many companies, it was a true transformation catalyst, as they needed to scale up their remote access infrastructure, start working from home, or reorganize their work processes. The pandemic has also proven wrong many of our assumptions. As a matter of fact, last year at our company, we discussed in the crisis committee a prolonged test for a pandemic scenario to be prepared for situations like the SARS pandemic that impacted Japan in the past. So we performed a test in November and December last year, having totally no idea that what we tested would very quickly become an actual reality. Now, some joke that internet access and toilet paper became suddenly the key elements of the pyramid of needs in many countries. But I think you get my point. We all took certain things for granted just because we were operating in a stable, fine-tuned system. And when the system got impacted by a chain of events, many of its elements could not be trusted anymore. It's very similar to a hacked system. Once it gets compromised, you can't take anything for sure. Around the end of the first quarter this year, I was preparing for a risk management conference where I share my story about IT transformation in coronavirus times. For the purposes of that talk, I did my own research internally within our company, as well as teamed up with one of our partner recruiters to see what impact did the pandemic have among our CIO peers. The results are very interesting. As you can see here, compared to the pre-COVID time, there is a lot of shift in priorities with a high demand for digitalization of processes and finding our way to have an online relationship with our customers, followed by a need to train our own staff to make better and safer use of the technology they are using day to day. And let's be very clear on this. In many companies, the transformation from paper to digital or from working in the office to working from home had to happen almost overnight. Many processes and the way of working had to be adapted to the new reality, putting lots of employees way out of their comfort zones, let alone exposing them to technology they were not used to utilize on a daily basis, as it was meant for, as some would say, these boring yearly emergency exercises only. Also, the COVID-19 transformation was and still is a solid stress test for our IT environment and ecosystems, which were often not designed to cope with large numbers of remote users. Which brings me to the point of my previous slide that many of our assumptions have been actually proven wrong. As you can imagine, every threat is an opportunity for the adversaries, and with a high pace of change, knowledge gaps, and an unprecedented shift to digital and remote, there will be always new weak links to exploit, be it related to security or availability. Many companies are utilizing or plan to utilize cloud, and the pandemic has certainly expedited some of the cloud migrations globally. At the same time, we often still lack sufficient knowledge on how to build cloud solutions and also how to secure them properly. You can find plenty of data leakage examples caused by unprotected storage buckets, databases, or insecure virtualized infrastructure. At the same time, with more people working from home or buying popular gadgets, the market of consumer electronics and IoT is becoming more and more popular for hackers, as the scale of attack and as the potential may be enormous, and there's a reason for it. So let me ask you a simple question. When was the last time you patched your internet router at home, even being an IT or security expert? Okay, and when do you think was the last time your not so tech-savvy relatives or friends changed the default password on such a device? Now, for how many of you the answer was never or no idea? Multiply this by only a fraction of the latest estimated number of 4.5 billion internet users we have. And the reason for this market being an interesting target becomes very clear. Needless to say, the same applies to social engineering, especially these days where many people impacted by COVID suffer from quarantine or prolonged work from home, becoming more vulnerable to such attacks than ever. The other interesting area is what I call legacy vulnerabilities, like the recent critical remote execution vulnerability in Windows DNS servers that apparently existed for 17 years. There is certainly lots of similar time bombs that just wait for being exploited, many times because we seem to focus on the new and shiny technology and just forget about the basics. So what does it mean to us? Looking at various independent studies executed last year and early this year, we may expect the shortage of skilled cybersecurity workers estimated to be between 3 and 4 million in 2021, with an average time of 3 to 6 months to fill in a position. This means that we have an enormous knowledge and experience gap to fill in order to satisfy these demands. At the same time, there is a number of key questions to be asked on how we tackle some of the underlying fundamental problems today. And I'm happy we have a broad spectrum of participants joining us today with many executives, security professionals, academics, and students. So If you're an executive, CEO, or CISO joining today, and you're, by the way, the majority of our audience, how do you position cybersecurity in your organization, and how do you attract talent? When is the last time your management team, your management or supervisory board discussed technology and security-related topics or had an awareness training? And finally, in your business strategy, do you or your CISO have the right mindset to treat security as an investment that will help you avoid losses and IT rework in the future rather than being solely a cost? If you're an academic professional, do you consider security topics in your research? Does security get sufficient focus in a study program? And do you encourage your students to specialize in this area? Finally, if you're a security professional, a student, or otherwise linked to or involved in security, when is the last time you learned something new on your own to broaden your knowledge? What do you do to motivate your colleagues to improve their cyber skills? And finally, what's your own security strategy and vision, and how do you want to develop yourself? Now, I do understand that some of these questions can't be answered on the spot, and we need a solid plan to strategically tackle cybersecurity, including the knowledge gap. As Benjamin Franklin said, by failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. And funny enough, if you search for this quote on the internet, it is attributed to Stephen McCraney, who is the creator of Spaceboy cartoon. The pace of change that we see today drives also the changes in security. The good thing is that security certainly gets more focus. At the same time, if you look at some of the technologies like cloud and analyze the speed at which new features are being deployed, we need to admit that we as security community clearly lag behind these developments and either don't understand or are not always able to take a full advantage of what is available on the market. One of the results of such a speed of change is the traditional model of IT security being the gatekeeper doesn't work that well anymore and screams for embedding security in the design as we are building new systems, applications, and technologies, followed by a more practical and pragmatic approach of continuous testing and improvement. This shift drives lots of new opportunities as it changes the profile of security jobs we have nowadays. On one hand, we still need core security function and people that have deep knowledge and understanding of security aspects. One of the growing expectations, however, is that these experts do not only do security, but they truly breathe security. And what I mean with that is that they can be the real evangelists in your environment, have a vision and energy to drive cyber development. At the same time, with the implementation of methodologies like DevSecOps, where we incorporate security aspects into every step of the development process, including automation of security checks, automated vulnerability scans, code quality reviews, etc., more and more non-security staff needs to have at least a sufficient understanding of cybersecurity and how it should be applied to their work, which is a typical example of a so-called T-shaped skill set with a core knowledge area and functional knowledge areas you can see depicted on the right. Sadly, the current traditional training offering is rather targeted at current or future security experts and seems to be focused on expanding the core knowledge area only rather than to provide guidance on the functional knowledge area to non-security people. This in turn might be an entry barrier for them as they may not have enough security background to get the most benefit of it. Finally, the development of new technologies, increased amounts of data we process, as well as growing needs for automation and usage of artificial intelligence provide an exciting opportunity for new jobs and specializations within security, which will require a very specific set of skills. Personally, I do expect a long-term shift from current security functions that are slowly becoming a commodity, like SOC analysts or even some junior forensics investigators, towards more specialized security data scientists that will be able to apply non-IT techniques that we traditionally use for, say, business data analysis to detect irregularities, inconsistencies, and trends. There is a whole area of adaptive IT technologies and algorithms that still waits to be properly researched and implemented, not only for security, but in IT in general. Next to this, there is an obvious shift in scope that slowly impacts our cybersecurity related jobs. Pen testers, security auditors, consultants, etc., as they all need to catch up with latest technologies. And here is a great lesson to learn from security startups, which do not possess the technological depth and are not afraid of making use of the latest developments. Also, as systems become more integrated, some traditional non-IT areas like physical security are becoming more and more a part of the cybersecurity ecosystem. Needless to say, all of these requires proper education. And what I mean by that is not only learning how things work, say, how do I use technology A or tool B, but why they work this way. For example, you may be a great cloud engineer that is able to set up a virtual subnet, but you still need to at least understand how TCP/IP works if you want to get it configured properly. As a security engineer or even as a developer, you might be using certain tooling that will help you find majority of the well-known vulnerabilities, but it's still unlikely that it will find a major vulnerability in your highly customized environment or code. So here we come to our topic of online cyber learning. And looking at the online cyber training market, there is plenty of options to choose from. It is now very easy to find something that will suit your needs and cover the topics you want to study. With many renowned universities and training institutions going online and implementing various kinds of education platforms, you can get access to the best possible teachers, content, you can take part in interactive sessions, and all this at your own home and many times at your own pace. This gives you a lot of flexibility, and next to that is certainly an unprecedented chance for people in various places in the world and in various circumstances that for multiple reasons would otherwise not be able to get access to the same level of education if it was offered in person only, especially in current pandemic times. Of course, not everything is as rosy as it seems. So let us go through some various options to discuss the advantages and caveats of online learning. Here I try to summarize some of the options available in the market. While it may not be the complete picture, it should give you enough information for your own security journey. Let's start with the online study or webinar on the left side, which is the most common form you can find online. It is usually the best way of learning new things in a structured way, similar to a regular class. There are many paid and free options available, and you can often earn a certificate or even a formal degree if such trainings are combined with any kind of examination. Also, very often you would have access to academics and professionals that can help you answering your questions related to the content. One of the many caveats here is that the quality can vary, regardless of whether you're using paid or free content. I've seen many great webinars where authors had to pass very strict quality checks, as well as lots of examples where the content was actually not factual, or its presentation was strongly biased. Well, while this can't be avoided with the amounts of content available on the internet, you need to make your research first to ensure that what you get will actually give you the right value. The next option, and my favorite, are the online labs and sandboxes. Here you get a chance to put the theoretical knowledge you gained into real practice and be able to trial and error without impacting your company's or your university's production environments. There are many vendors that offer these kinds of sandboxes to get you acquainted with their products, as well as some certification bodies that will give you a certificate only if you'll be able to find solutions to certain practical problems. Here you're, however, totally on your own. On one hand, the more you play and the more practical scenarios you're exposed to, the more you get out of it. You also get to develop your creativity here, especially if multiple solutions for a given problem exist. On the other hand, though, you run a risk of developing bad habits as there is nobody to correct your mistakes, which can give a false sense of accomplishment, especially if you manage to solve some of the problems more by luck than by consciously using your knowledge. The last option on the right side, being rather an extension than an online learning approach, if you will, are various online groups and forums. They give you the opportunity to meet and discuss with practitioners and often get solutions that are specific to some of your most exotic problems, just because someone has faced a similar situation in the past. It is a fantastic way to build your informal network and exchange experiences. Still, as you probably know, there is little to no guarantee and moderation on the quality of this content. Well, looking at these three options, the best way to utilize them, in my opinion, is to have your own combination. To build your fundamental knowledge, to be able to apply it, and share your curiosity with others. Some would say, okay, Bart, this all sounds great, but is this a remedy for everything? And the answer is no, of course not. Which brings me to the quote you see on the right I really like. So regardless of the type of training, the most important thing is building the right mindset rather than only scoring a grade. As the author says, working with your hands, brains, and heart is what makes you a real artist, and a formal training you get before is only the beginning of your journey. When I talk to recruiters about security or IT positions in general, I often say that I'm looking for candidates with hacker's mind. By this, I mean a combination of knowledge and practice combined with great passion and creativity, elements you need to have if you want to be successful, no matter how shiny your CV is. Make sure your resume reflects the truth. When I interview, I frequently give our candidates some example problems to solve on the spot, often related to the experience they've put in their CVs. What I'm looking here for is to see the candidate's train of thought rather than expecting a perfect answer or solution to my problem. What really matters here is whether you understand what you're doing, you understand what you know and what you don't know, and find your way to solve an issue. In a similar way, I do tend to ask the dreaded question of where do you want to be in 2 to 5 years, not because I'm going through an interview checklist, but because I'm truly interested in your personal plans and ambitions, especially in cases where I may have a longer vision for certain candidates or positions they're applying for. Also, one final pro tip here, make sure your resume is really to the point. I've seen too many CVs where people try to list all network protocols they've ever dealt with or all Windows versions since the 90s. I mean, it's great you've got a lot of exposure. At the same time, probably even my own experience in using, say, MS-DOS 5 for installing CorelDRAW from 33 floppies around 30 years ago won't be that relevant anymore. So we touched a little bit about curiosity, study, and practice, as well as building the right mindset. Now, let's talk about you. Regardless of whether you're just entering the job market or you're a seasoned security professional or an executive transforming your organization and searching for new security talent, these 4 questions may be very relevant for you and your candidates. So what are your ambitions? What training do I need? And how can I use it in practice? Do I have the right mindset to question things? What about my curiosity? Am I passionate about what I'm doing? Is security or IT in general the right thing for me? Or do I just do it because it's a hot job? Do I prefer problem solving or rather repeatable tasks? Think about these questions. They are here to trigger you, and there are no good or bad responses to these, as we are all different, but depending on how you answer these for yourself, Your training or your career path may differ from somebody sitting just next to you in the office or at school, and that's perfectly fine. Most importantly, however, just be yourself. The next and the final slide I wanted to share with you before we go to conclusions is my takeaway exercise to make this webinar a little bit more interactive. So here is my task for you. Identify what skills you really want to learn in the next 6 months and how you can utilize these in practice. For these skills, think of 2 to 3 trainings and assess these in the context of content and learning method provided, as well as expected quality and deliverables. Now, when you have this, make a realistic time plan, including when you expect to employ these new skills. Don't head for a training which would teach you something you're not going to use, say, until end of next year, because it's generally a bad investment of your time and money. And now, for the most difficult part, execute your plan and stay passionate about it. It's a long-term commitment, so don't expect yields right away. That brings us to conclusions, and I must admit we covered quite some topics today in the past 30 minutes or so, and I do understand that probably not everything was discussed at the same level of detail. Let me summarize some of the things we talked about. Firstly, it goes without saying that online learning gives you a great opportunity to learn new skills, and depending on what kind of training delivery method you follow, like an online study or a sandbox lab, you may also be able to apply them instantly in practice. Regardless of that, you will still need to make sure you cover the fundamentals first in order to make full advantage of your online training. You need to know your preferences and assess what type of training delivery method suits you, whether its quality is acceptable for you, and if it fits into your personal development plan. Secondly, the pace of change in security will require a shift in mindset, more T-shaped personnel, and will lead to a transformation of security teams into practitioners and evangelists. We can also expect new kinds of jobs within security as the technology evolves, while some of the current roles will eventually become obsolete with automation. And finally, for the moment, we have to live with the effects of COVID, cyber knowledge gap, and demand for increased speed of delivery, which all drives certain cyber topics in 2020 and 2021, like issues related to premature usage of new technology, weaknesses in consumer market infrastructure, as well as discovery of some legacy vulnerabilities. This is why, despite the pandemic, the cyber job market will still remain hot for a while. And I guess that's all for today. Once again, many thanks for participating, and I'll be happy to answer your questions in our Q&A session.